Assalamu alaikum. Please silence your devices. We are live. Inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، على الصلاة، على الفلاح، على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله I apologize for coming in late and not settling down. I had unavoidable circumstances, and so forgive me. It's very open to this right now. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi. Alhamdulillahi nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udhu billahi min shururi wa min sayyiati a'malina wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Brothers and sisters, before getting into the theme of the Khutbah today, I ask that we remember our brothers and sisters throughout the Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad SAW, who were in some kind of pain or difficulty, or suffering, whether we know the cause of this pain and difficulty or not. I ask that we remember our brothers and sisters in the majority Muslim country of Morocco. We know that in Morocco a few days ago, there was a very devastating earthquake. And at this particular point, they are counting maybe 2,900 accounted for persons who died as a result, as a direct result of this earthquake. It's devastated entire communities in terms of just wiping out houses, just wiping out the infrastructure of cities there in Morocco. There are almost 6,000 people who have been found at this point, but they say that they know that these people are severely injured. It is a disaster in Morocco because of the devastation coming from this hurricane. And also, let's remember our brothers and sisters in Libya. They have had floods in Libya, one major flood in particular. And if the country of Libya and the people of Libya were not suffering enough for the last, since 2011, they've had two governments, both claiming to be the authorities over Libya, a government in the east and a government in the west. But now Libya and the people of Libya are suffering from tremendous floods. These floods have killed, estimated right now on this Al-Jumah, have killed up to 20,000 people. And it was not just the floods itself. There were two water dams, and those dams broke because of neglect, because of the conflict of who's going to be the leader of this country, and funds being directed to places other than infrastructure. So these two huge dams burst. And the tragedy is that the reality is that they say that so many of these tens of thousands of people who are known dead were washed into the sea. And they drowned in the sea, or they just drowned under the water. The water's flood was devastating. And on top of the flooding, we had the breaking of these two dams. So let us remember our brothers and sisters in Libya. And for those of us who can, let's do more than just remember them in Al-Jumah. Let's see how we can make some kind of contribution to help the situation there in Libya today. Brothers and sisters, I'm not going to take much of your time, but I want to share a Khutbah theme that is kind of very near and dear to my heart. It's a theme that when the most early days of embracing this land and the latter days up until this moment, that there are ayahs in the Quran that inspire all of us in different kinds of ways. But for some reason, this particular ayah, or these ayah, just gripped me and gripped my heart and have caused me to try to the best of my limited ability to give whatever I have fi sabilillah, to the cause of Allah. I'm not talking about monetarily, but I'm talking about whatever time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me, no matter how limited I am in so many different areas, whatever it is that I have been allowed to do, I've been inspired in so many instances because of these two ayahs. And so I want to try to set a background, a historical context, before even sharing the ayahs. You and I know when we read the Sirah literature that shortly after the Hijrah for the Prophet Muhammad and the believers from Mecca to Medina, Medina underwent a tremendous drought. So we're talking about a desert environment already, but in that desert environment, shortly after the Hijrah, I'm not talking about 1 month or 2 months, maybe a couple of years after this Hijrah from Mecca to Medina, the city of Medina, that entire area experienced a tremendous drought. And the Prophet Muhammad with his analytical brilliance and being guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those Muslims who had made the Hijrah with the Prophet Muhammad who had left behind all of their goods and possessions, only what they could carry on their backs. But the Prophet Muhammad was such a brilliantly guided man from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he established this unique brotherhood where he assigned one man who was coming from Mecca, assigned him to someone that was living there in Medina who had embraced Islam by the time that this Hijrah was made. And so even though they left behind almost everything that they had, even though this tremendous drought was going on, once they got there and settled in, we find the conditions of that small group of Muslims in Medina at that time was relatively less severe in the deprivation, less severe in people starving. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sufficed for the Prophet Muhammad and the believers with him by their coming together, by their sharing what they had, by understanding that we're in an environment that the only reason we are here, that all of the people that we look at who are part of our community believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and follow the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so different tribes will come into Medina, that the word spread that the drought is terrible and the Muslims are having a hard time, but it seems like it's not quite as bad as the other Muslims living there in Medina. So tribes start coming to Medina. Many of them didn't profess Islam at all. They just heard that maybe we can get a slice of bread, maybe we can get just a drink of water, because we don't have anything where we're coming from. One of these tribes that came to Medina was the Banu Asad. The Banu Asad had a few men in this tribe who were very arrogant. They were very arrogant that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. I've never read anything in the seerah of hadith literature or nothing in the Quran saying whether or not there was a pre-arranged agreement from the members of these Banu Asad who were going into Medina, whether they would come in there saying, we are Muslim, we are mu'minun, we are believers. Only Allah knows. But the behavior of many of those men who were coming in trying to get assistance was not the character, it wasn't showing the kind of spirit of Islam that one would expect going to the messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so there were a few of these young men that went to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said to him that how much of a believer he is, how much of a believer they are. And we find that these people came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam making this declaration. It wasn't the whole tribe, but a handful of them came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam telling him that we believe, saying to the messenger of Allah, I mean, understand this kind of mindset, that you're coming to the messenger of Allah, and one of the first things out of your mouth, you're not saying that I'm a Muslim. I heard about you, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what you were doing, so I embraced Islam. No, they take it to another level and they declare themselves that we are mu'minun, we are believers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say to these people, no matter what shahada they've taken and no matter where they're taking it, say to these people, don't say that you are a believer at this point, because faith hasn't entered your heart. That there's a relationship, and I'm editorializing, there's a relationship between what we profess and what we do. And you haven't done anything yet. I know nothing about anything that you all have done, fisabilillah. And then one of the men who was in this delegation said to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, well, you know what? When all those tribes were fighting against you, trying to kill you on so many battlefields, we didn't raise a hand against you or the Muslims. This guy was so arrogant that he's saying to the messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that you should count what my shahada and our shahada as a blessing to you. Because we had the capacity to fight against you, we didn't. But you should think of this as a favor that I and those who've come here have done for you. Brothers and sisters, the arrogance coming from these people, coming for the express purpose of trying to get assistance so that they could survive during the period of this drought. To come there, knowing that amongst the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, he had Sahaba and Sahabiyah, men and women, who had just left behind almost everything that they owned. You're coming here declaring yourself to be a believer. And these people who were with the Prophet Muhammad sacrificed their lives. They put their lives in jeopardy. They made every sacrifice that was needed to get to this point now. And you're coming in here declaring by your declaration that count me like Omar ibn al-Khattab, count me like Abu Bakr Siddiq, count me like those men, those women who stood by your side for all of those years. I'm on the same level because I've made this shahada, I've made this declaration. As if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not looking at our faith, what we're declaring, but also looking at what we do. Not just what's coming out of our mouths, what we're saying, what are we doing? Feasibility. So, brothers, these arrogant folks from this Banu Assad tribe came in saying, Amanna, that we have come to believe, that we are believers. And we find the commentary about this particular ayah and saying they used the wrong word. They shouldn't have come in declaring themselves believers. Come in and say that I've surrendered my will, that I have declared that I am a Muslim. Say, Aslamna, that we have surrendered, as opposed to declaring something that you had not experienced at that point. آتنا في الدنيا حسنات وفي الآخرة حسنات وقنا عذاب النار. Brothers and sisters, this idea of having faith, and specifically as Muslims, having faith, and that faith that we may think we have is not being followed up and not going parallel with appropriate actions. How do we view ourselves as Muslims? Has our shahada, has our declaration of faith, if we are born into this Islam, we're born at a young age making salat, declaring the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how is that defined in our behavior? How does it show? How can someone look at you, look at me, and say that this is man, that this woman, this child is serious about their faith? I know there are no such thing as perfect human beings, but what I see in the behavior of these individuals, they are trying hard. And they're not wavering in their belief, regardless of what's going on in the society. They don't care how much you take an idiot like this guy. And I got to remember his prison number, who was the 45th president. You take a person like this, and the first thing comes out of his mouth is, I'm not going to let Muslims come into this country to immigrate here, to visit this country from 7 different Muslim majority countries. 7 different countries. But those who have the strength of a man that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you to hold on to this deen regardless of what's going on, to grow your iman inside your hearts, that this is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is given to those who make this declaration. That's most important. We have to do that. But then follow it up with the action that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed for us in the Quran, and what we find in the prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brothers and sisters, the Allah and the way that the Quran was ordered. Follow up this, why are you saying you're a believer? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on to define for us, in His eyes, what constitutes a believer. The Shahada is the first step. But what really makes you a movement? How do you get from one place to the next when it comes to your faith? And this ayah 15 in Surah Al-Hujurat, the 49th surah in the Quran, read in translation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala declares in this particular instance of the scenario that I gave, that only those are believers who have believed in Allah and His Messenger, and have never sensed doubt, that have striven with their belongings and their persons in the cause of Allah. Such are the sincere ones. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is making it clear to us, even 1,400 years after the revelation, more than 1,400 years after the revelation of this Quran. Don't think of ourselves in a way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has defined that we're not deserving of a certain kind of identification. No one goes around and pointing out, you're a believer, you just took Shahada, you're a believer. That's not the intent of the ayah. It's for us and Allah to understand that faith without actions is nothing. What good is it going to do? Let me give an example. The good that is done is what we see across the Muslim world today, with Muslim head of state, with majority Muslim lands. In some of these countries, rich enough that they own almost half of the United States itself. I read somewhere where there's some Muslim countries that this country is so much in pawn to them that there are certain monuments that they say, well, I don't like this. Y'all need to do this in a different way. That they are dictating those most precious monuments in this country, dictating in instances, what we don't like this, so do this way. So the question becomes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing these things to happen, but what about us here, right here in the United States? I'll say this real quickly and I'll end. And that is that for anyone who is familiar with what has happened in this country over the last half century or more, we have to look and understand that we are in times in uncharted water. The only thing we can compare these times to is the U.S. Civil War, where more American citizens died in that particular war than in war that this country has been engaged in. Simply put, that the most lives in the history of the United States that were lost were Americans killing other Americans. The most that have ever been lost in any war was during this particular altercation. And so now we come to the present, and we are wondering who is going to guide the nation? Who is it that can bring us to the other side of this social storm, this social hurricane that we find ourselves in this country? And so some of us, and I'm not saying this trying to deride or say anything bad about anybody and whatever your political or social affiliations are, but there are some Muslims in this country who are putting their hope in a political party, that we have to do everything we can to get representatives from this party to be in office, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the Muslims an opportunity and a responsibility to be a part of a party that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the creator of everything, has put together for those of us who say that we are Muslim. It's called Hezbollah. It's called the party of Allah. It's not saying I'm a Democrat and the Democrats and my affiliation with them is going to save me and save America. It's not saying the Republicans and my affiliation with them is going to save me and save America. Independents, pick a Green Party, wherever you want to say. No. The party of the Muslims, if you and I are not just going to sit on the sidelines of our lives of this country and just watch like we're watching a parade go by, then understand this Hezbollah. Understand what constitutes, and I'm not talking about an organization. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a mindset. I'm talking about how we have to come together and organize ourselves and work feasibility law. The party of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been perfected in its construction by the Lord of the universe and demonstrated for us by the best human to walk the earth, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So let us not sit back and wait for someone to come save the Muslims. Who's going to save us in this country? I know Allah, inshallah, won't allow us to be just wiped out. Who's going to save us? Look to ourselves. Look to the guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving this ummah. That no human being can construct anything like this broader Hezbollah, this party of Allah. And I want to make sure that I'm trying to be clear with what I'm saying. I'm not talking about a specific, any name of a Muslim gathering and group of people. I'm talking about this broader concept that no matter where we live, no matter what part of this country, no matter where we have lived anywhere on the earth, wherever there are Muslims, our party should be that of the party of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's something that works. It worked at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It worked at different periods of the history of Muslims from the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam up to this day. Dua, oh Allah, give us an understanding of this deen that is useful for us in this world and in the next. Oh Allah, strengthen our resolve to work for your cause and your cause to the best of our ability. And oh Allah, make not this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam an object of test for the disbelieving people. I have a few quick announcements, short announcements, important announcements. Today